Hello everyone, welcome, Dom here, and today I want to talk a little bit about a feature that I wish more plugins had at this day and age. And this is multiple sidechain inputs. Let's talk about it. So a while ago I made a video and I talked about a trick that I use all the time to get clean mixes. And in that video I showed you how to make every track sit well in the mix without butchering it with EQ. If you're interested, check it out right here. I'm gonna have it. It seems that many of you guys love this video, but after reading quite a few of the comments on this video, I realized that there's a little bit of a misconception on what I was trying to do on this video. Now, people saw this and immediately they told me this is, very easy to do in Logic or in Reaper. I don't know, it doesn't matter. What matters is that there is a little bit of a difference to what I did in this video rather than just using sidechain on several plugins. So let me recap what I did on this video. Let's play this track and I'm going to show you my Rhodes part here.
Oh, I still love you. I hope you know. Can't deny the truth. We were never meant.
So what's going on here? I have two dynamic EQ bands in frequency 2. With one of them, I'm reducing the mid signal of the mids to make room for the vocal. So the Rhodes is sidechained to the vocal, and the other band number 2, I have it sidechained to my bass. So when the bass hits, we have a reduction in the low level to make room for the bass, because we don't need all this low end for the Rhodes when the bass plays, because the bass takes care of the low end in this case. And in order to show you this, I'm going to use the listen function in Cubase so that we can isolate this part, but we can still hear the effect of the sidechains. Let me play the Rhodes. So without the EQ, listen to this low end and the mid range. Now let me turn off the bass. Low end is back. Okay, now let's mute the vocals. Mid-range. Vocals back. And now let's play it in the context of the mix.
Oh, I still love you. I hope you know. Can't deny the truth. We were never meant to be.
So the point of this technique is to make sure that we don't butcher every single sound with static EQing, but I'm using two separate bands to tackle different problems. Now, many people told me, oh, okay, I'm using Track Spacer, I'm using the X plugin in Reaper, I'm using the X plugin in Logic. And basically some people told me, well, this is sidechain, every DAW has this. Yes and no. Sidechain is a feature that most DAWs have. But, for example, let me bring up the plugin that many of you have been talking about, and this is Track Spacer. Many of you told me, oh, well, I do this with Track Spacer. And Track Spacer is an amazing plugin. I use it all the time. However, here's what happens with Track Spacer. With Track Spacer, I can say, okay, I have this instance of Track Spacer, and now I want to sidechain this to, let's say, my bass, okay? Now, let's say I want to add another sidechain source. Now, let's say I want to add my vocal, okay? I'm going to add my vocal here, and I have another sidechain source. Now, here's the difference. When I do this, you will see that I have no control. Apart from the high cut and apart from the low cut, I have zero control over what happens. So I don't want my bass to reduce the mid-range of my Rhodes. I don't want my vocal to reduce my top end and my lows of my Rhodes. But when I play this, check what happens.
Sorry, I had to leave. Now you know why. I had to go. I still love you. I hope you know.
Now, what is happening is you can see this scoop here. I'm butchering this Rhodes. This is not the best way to do this, and that's why I'm saying this feature that I showed on that video, I think it should be on every plugin. What we need for this kind of thing is a plugin, a dynamic EQ that allows for multiple sidechain, not sources, but inputs. Okay, so let me show you the difference. Here's the frequency EQ. And as you can see, I have two different bands. Then that means that I would have the vocal and the bass here on one single input. This means that both of them would trigger these two bands at the same time. Okay, but here's the difference. Here's what makes this technique special that I showed you on that video. If I go here, I have a sidechain input where I have my vocal, and I also have a sidechain input which is separate that is triggered by my bass. Now, when I go to these two bands, you can see that this band is triggered by sidechain 1, which is my vocal, because I want the vocal only to trigger the mid-range. And band number 2 is triggered by sidechain 2, which, you guessed it, is my bass. So the bass doesn't interfere with the mid-range. The vocal doesn't interfere with the low end or the top end. So it's a very, very big difference. Sidechain sources and sidechain inputs. Sidechain sources means that I have several sources to trigger the plugin, but I have no control over what these sources affect because they're all summed into one bus, where when we have two sidechain inputs like vocals and bass, we can have separate things happening on these two sidechain inputs, and we can trigger different things. So I would imagine that this feature would be extremely useful to plugins that are multiband compressors, dynamic EQs, multiband saturators, envelope shapers. All these plugins would benefit from multiple sidechain inputs, not sources. Sources is something that every DAW that respects itself can do these days. But sidechain inputs, that's a different story. When you go to sidechain inputs, you need a plugin that supports sidechain inputs. And up to this point, the only plugin that I know that does this is the Frequency 2 EQ in Cubase. Now, some people showed me how to do this in other DAWs. I think a viewer showed me how to do this in FL Studio, and it is possible. It's quite complex though. It's very, very complex. This is literally one click and you can do this, because you go here and you say, okay, I want to select which sidechain input I want. I have 8, so I can actually have, let's say, a saxophone trigger a different range in the mid-range, and I can have a different band doing this. And also, Frequency 2 is very, very natural because you basically have the attack, the release, so I can have different settings for the attack and release for my bass and different settings for the attack and release for my vocal, for example, because these are going to be different, trust me. I hope that this video clarifies the difference of what I showed on that video. The difference between sidechain inputs and sidechain sources. It's very different. I tried to respond to as many comments as possible that told me, okay, well, you can have multiple sidechain sources. It's a very different thing. So my wish is that more plugins support this multiple sidechain inputs feature, especially EQs, dynamic EQs, multiband compressors, all these things. This would really change the game, and it is possible because it's possible with the VST3 format. I'm not sure about AU or AAX, but it's definitely possible in the VST3 format. So if you want more plugins to support this, let me know in the comments down below. Let's open a conversation. Maybe some developers will listen and we will have more plugins that support this function, because I would want to see more plugins like this. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful. And as always, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. I would really appreciate it. It's free. If you like this video, let me know, or use the super thanks button to support the channel, or check out my instruments, the Modern 80s drum kit and the Apollo expansion for Pad Shop. Until next time, happy mixing, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.